Imagine a terrifying monster hiding in plain sight behind a human mask, being hunted by two officers who are already dead. But what happens when your own greed forces you to choose between the integrity you held in life and the impossible reality of the afterlife? Let's dive into the mystery of this strange world. The story opens with two officers hot on the trail of a man carrying a suitcase packed with gold. After hours of pursuit, they finally corner him, demanding the return of the loot, but the suspect refuses to play along. Fed up with hiding his true nature from the world, he abandons his human disguise. Beneath the skin lies a terrifying monster, and in a flash of violence, he attacks the officers and makes a break for it. The cops scramble after him, firing shots that strike his back, yet he keeps running, a relentless force, eventually vanishing into the night. Officer Nick tries to get a clean shot off, but before he can pull the trigger, a speeding car flattens the creature. Back at headquarters, the two partners face a brutal dressing down. Their superiors are furious that they left a monster running loose on the streets in broad daylight. The incident is already dominating every news channel, and humanity now knows that monsters walk among them. Because it's Nick's first day on the job, he gets off with a warning. But his partner, Roy, isn't so lucky. He's slapped with a 50-year extension on his duty, a life sentence in this afterlife precinct. You see, everyone in this department is dead. Every person walking these halls has already passed on from the living world. Nick died just 3 days ago, while Roy has been dead for 2 centuries. In his former life, Nick was the definition of an honest cop, a man whose integrity was legendary. But that rigid morality kept him poor. While corrupt officers in the lower ranks flaunted luxury homes, Nick struggled to make ends meet in a tiny house. He prayed for a chance to finally get ahead, and it seemed like fate finally listened. During a raid on a major drug kingpin's factory, Nick and his partner, Kevin, stumbled upon a massive stash of gold, money that didn't exist on any official record. It was the perfect opportunity, a literal fortune falling into their laps. They split the haul, and while Kevin took his share home, Nick buried his gold in the backyard, planting an orange tree over the spot to hide it from prying eyes. When he woke up the next morning, he prayed it was just a fever dream, but the sight of that sapling confirmed the reality. The gold was real. He asked his wife, Julia, if she didn't want a better home or a luxury car, but she was different. She valued peace and honesty far more than material wealth. Guilt began to gnaw at Nick. Swayed by Kevin, he had committed a crime, but the weight of it was suffocating. He decided to turn his share in, determined to keep his badge clean. Kevin, however, tried to rationalize it, arguing that the drug lords weren't exactly innocent victims, and promised to handle everything. But Nick didn't care about getting caught. He just couldn't bear the thought of lying to his wife. Seeing the disappointment in Kevin's eyes, the dream of a new speedboat slipping away, Kevin eventually decided to do the right thing and return his share, too. They were still debating the fallout when news arrived that the drug lord they'd been hunting had been spotted at an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. With that, Nick led his full police force into the assault. But this wouldn't be easy. They were going up against Boston's biggest drug lord, guarded by over 30 armed men. Nick spearheaded the breach, kicking in the door, but Kevin's warning came too late. The cartel opened fire in a hail of bullets. As Nick pushed forward, he saw the kingpin making a run for it. He gave chase, barely dodging death as he climbed higher, only to see his target leap out a window. Before he could call for backup, Kevin burst in. They had been partners for years, but something in Kevin's eyes was ice cold. "I can't let you turn that gold in, Nick." Nick thought it was a sick joke until Kevin pulled the trigger. Nick crumpled to the floor headfirst. Moments later, he woke up, shocked to be breathing. No one survives a fall like that. The atmosphere shifted. The wind died, and everything around him froze in place. It hit him, he was dead, his soul crossing over. As he stumbled outside, the world was completely still, and a swirling vortex of clouds hovered above, dragging him into the unknown. He emerged in a strange, otherworldly realm, surrounded by millions of souls funneling through portals. Suddenly, he was teleported into a crisp, white office, face to face with a woman named Proctor. She told him to stay calm, noting she had once sat in the same chair. Nick learned he was dead, and if he didn't play by the rules of this precinct, he was headed straight for hell. Proctor handed him a file, a decorated officer who turned greedy in his final days. To avoid damnation, Nick was forced to join the RIPD, the Rest in Peace Department, tasked with hunting down the deados who escaped judgment. He signed on instantly, desperate to find a way back to Julia. A badge materialized on his chest, marking him as an agent. Proctor explained that those who evade judgment slowly rot, transforming into dangerous, inhuman monsters that hide in plain sight. Without the RIPD, the world would be overrun by these things, and ordinary people wouldn't stand a chance. With 500 people dying daily, the department was chronically short-staffed. A rogue monster tried to bolt, only for Roy, a veteran officer, to gun him down, an act that earned him no friends in the office. When Proctor introduced Roy as Nick's new partner, Roy flatly refused. He worked alone, but these were orders from the top. Nick reached out a hand, but Roy recoiled, sneering that Nick had to earn his place. Roy would spend the next 24 hours deciding if Nick was worth the trouble. They stepped into a bathroom, Roy pulled the flush, and they were pulled back into the human world. Roy took him to his own funeral to drive the point home. Nick was gone. He saw Kevin there, playing the grieving friend. Roy muttered that at least Nick got a coffin. Had been murdered and left in the desert for the vultures. Unable to stand the sight of Julia in agony, Nick ran to her, screaming that he was still there, but she looked right through him, seeing only a total stranger. Furious, Nick lunged at Kevin, but the cops tossed him out like a vagrant. When Nick demanded to know why Julia couldn't see him, Roy dropped the hard truth. They were no longer themselves. Their faces, their voices, everything had changed. It was a rule of the job. The afterlife would never allow them to reveal the truth to the living. When Nick finally demanded to see what he looked like, Roy handed him his new ID. He wasn't a hero anymore, he was an 80-year-old Chinese man. That was why Julia couldn't recognize him. Nick then asked Roy about his own appearance, and when Roy flashed his ID, Nick's jaw hit the floor. The higher-ups had given Roy the form of a stunning woman. Only they could see each other's true identities. To everyone else, they remained their disguised avatars. Roy received a tip about a monster hiding in the city for years. Roy explained that getting the truth out of a monster is nearly impossible, but they have a tell. A lingering, pungent stench that rots everything their tainted souls touch. As they approached the suspect's apartment, Nick saw the decay with his own eyes, walls turning black and crumbling, visible only to them. Just as Nick reached for the handle, Roy stopped him. "You have no idea what's waiting on the other side," he warned, him going in first. When they confronted Stanley, he acted like an innocent human. Roy leaned in. "Stanley, we suspect you're dead." Stanley played it cool, inviting them to check his pulse, but Roy had his own interrogation tactics. He started eating a tandoori chicken, forcing Nick to ask questions that were solely about food, the ultimate weakness for these monsters. As the scent overwhelmed him, Stanley's facade cracked, and he morphed into his grotesque true form. Roy ordered the arrest, but Nick struggled to cuff the beast, especially when the monster sprouted extra arms. The creature fought back, lunged through a window, and plummeted to the ground. Nick figured the fall killed him, but the beast stood right back up. Roy and Nick jumped after him, proving that while they couldn't die, they certainly weren't immune to pain. The monster tried to escape with something hidden in his mouth, but Nick tackled him, beating him until he spat it out. A piece of the very same gold Nick had stolen. Roy took down the monster, but he was furious with Nick's sloppy methods, docking points from his report. Irritated, Nick shoved Roy into the path of an oncoming truck. Back at the office, Roy blew a fuse over his ruined favorite hat. Nick apologized, but his mind was elsewhere. He insisted they investigate why the monster was so desperate to protect a shard of gold. But Roy brushed it off, convinced it was just scrap metal and that Nick was overthinking it. He dumped the pieces into the evidence locker, pestering Roy until he gave in. Nick eventually visited a snitch who kept tabs on the monster underworld. When Nick asked why a monster would kill for a piece of gold, the snitch dismissed him, claiming it was fake and a waste of time. Nick handed over a shard, asking to be kept in the loop. As they left, the snitch scurried off to a secret meeting, unaware that Nick was tailing him. He had deliberately lied. He knew exactly who would come for that gold. A car pulled up, and Nick's blood ran cold. Out stepped Kevin, his treacherous former partner, who had clearly kept his own stash. Nick shadowed him straight to his own house. Kevin cornered Julia and revealed exactly where Nick had buried the rest of the gold. As Julia watched Kevin tear up their garden, she looked at the stash with disgust, her heart breaking for the husband she thought had been a hero. Kevin fed her a lie, claiming he was returning the evidence to the police to clear Nick's name. Nick watched from the shadows, helpless. He couldn't tell her the truth. Kevin then hauled the gold to the airport, handing the suitcase to a heavy-set man. Nick and Roy cornered the man, holding him at gunpoint. Nick demanded answers, but when the man clammed up, Nick sprinkled him with black pepper powder. The monster began to morph, forced into his true form. They expected him to break, but the monster was done hiding. He was tired of living in the shadows, and he wasn't about to keep his secrets any longer. The monster inhaled the rest of the powder, morphing into his true, horrific form. Roy fired an arrow that pinned him to the wall, but the creature was relentless, using his wall-crawling abilities to gain the upper hand. Nick tried to draw a bead on him, but he was struck by a speeding car, and by the time he recovered, the beast had smashed through a window. When the elevator jammed, the monster literally tore the doors apart. Nick, waiting in ambush, blew the elevator cables. The car rocketed upward with such force it punched clean through the roof of the building. When Nick scrambled out, he found Roy dangling from the side. The monster had escaped with the gold. They returned to headquarters, but Proctor was livid. Their incompetence had allowed a monster to roam free, and now the story was all over the news. Humanity was waking up to the nightmare in their midst. But there was a worse discovery. Proctor received intel that the stolen gold was actually a piece of a catastrophic artifact. If reassembled, it would reverse the portals, unleashing the dead upon the living. To make matters worse, Nick and Roy were suspended, and by the next morning they were to be erased. Nick spiraled. This job was his only link to Julia. Desperate, he rushed to find her one last time before he ceased to exist. Julia was out for a late-night jog when she sensed a shadow stalking her. She spun around to find that same old Chinese man watching her. Nick tried to tell her the truth, but his words reached her only as garbled noise. Yet, through the facade, she caught a glimpse of the man she had loved. Roy snapped at him, "Stop it. You're only hurting her. She needs to learn to live without you, to build a new life because you aren't coming back." The cold reality infuriated Nick. He lashed out, desperate to inflict his own agony on Roy, screaming, "The vultures that tore you apart? They weren't the villains, Roy, they were the heroes because you deserved that death." The words hit Roy like a physical blow, reopening 2 centuries of buried scars. He slumped down, devastated. Nick realized his cruelty immediately and apologized, and for a rare moment, they found common ground. Nick questioned how Head partnered with Kevin for years without realizing he was a ghost. Roy explained that there were dark artifacts that could mask the signs of the dead, the very thing Kevin had been hiding behind. Nick realized it was the bracelet Kevin always wore. Kevin wasn't just a partner, he was the mastermind behind it all. That night, Kevin handed over the final piece of the artifact to a mysterious accomplice, preparing for a devastating blast that would tear the world apart. The next morning, Julia called Kevin, mentioning that the old man had visited her again, and she was certain it was Nick. Kevin panicked. He saw the old man lurking outside his house. Nick breached the back entrance while Roy kicked in the front, demanding Kevin show his true self. Kevin reached for a weapon, but Nick leveled his gun, forcing him to face his former partner. Nick demanded he drop the bracelet. The second Kevin pulled it off, his house shattered around him, revealing the truth. Kevin was dead too. Roy recovered the stolen gold, and they hauled Kevin into headquarters for judgment. He sat there, utterly unrepentant, while on the outside, the monster Kevin had conspired with began to stir, ready to set the world on fire. They had no idea it was all part of his scheme. When Roy searched him, he found the other half of the artifact. Oblivious to the danger, Roy tossed it with the rest of the evidence, and the moment the 2 pieces touched, they began to fuse. Kevin smirked. "Being a monster has its perks. We hear things you mortals can't." Nick sensed the trap, but it was too late. The artifact locked into place, triggering a blast that froze everything in the precinct. The monsters, immune to the pulse, snatched the remaining items needed to stabilize the portal. Roy blasted the artifact, breaking its hold, but Kevin was already gone, signaling his minions to initiate the sequence. A massive portal tore open in the sky. Nick lunged for Kevin, but a wall of monsters stood in his way, one of them unleashing a barrage of machine gun fire until his magazine ran dry. Nick and Roy didn't flinch. They tore through the ranks, cutting down the beasts one by one. But the sky was fracturing, dozens of portals were opening, and the city was descending into chaos. Kevin ordered his men to seal the perimeter, ensuring no one could stop the invasion. Nick and Roy had to break the blockade. A hulking monster leaped onto their car, blinding them with his bulk until Nick smashed the vehicle headlong into a building. Meanwhile, Julia had been dragged to the site, Kevin needed a human sacrifice to fully stabilize the breach. As she fought back, Kevin morphed into his true, grotesque form. High above, a news helicopter was broadcasting the carnage live, but a runaway bulldozer collided with the chopper, sending it into a tailspin. The massive machine teetered on the edge of the roof, hovering precariously over the artifact. Kevin slammed the final piece into place, the sky screaming as the gates to hell swung wide. He struck Julia, her blood dripping onto the artifact, fueling the final seal. Nick arrived a second too late. The portal was wide open, and thousands of restless souls were surging through. Roy tried to wrench the portal shut, but it wouldn't budge. Seeing Julia broken and bleeding, Nick snapped, launching himself at Kevin in a blind, savage rage. But Kevin was stronger, crushing a slab of stone over Nick's head. Roy, still straining against the portal, looked up and spotted the precariously balanced bulldozer. He anchored a rope to the machine and yanked with everything he had. The bulldozer plummeted, slamming into the artifact and shattering it instantly. As the portal collapsed, the invading spirits were ripped back into the void, Kevin's years of work undone in a heartbeat. Nick wasted no time, ending Kevin's reign for good. The world was saved. Julia lay dying, caught between life and death. For a fleeting second, the world froze for her just as it had for Nick, and she saw him, not as the old man, but as the man she loved. She passed away, but it wasn't the end. When she woke in the hospital, she was miraculously healed, her memories wiped by Proctor, so she could start a life without the burden of the past. Proctor granted Nick a release for his service, but Roy was slapped with another 50-year extension, a sentence he took in stride, having been here many times before. Roy told Nick, "I know you weren't thrilled about being Grandpa Chin, so I pulled some strings for a new ID." Nick was elated until he saw the file. They'd turned him into a teenage girl. And with that, the story concludes. I hope you enjoyed this recap. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.